As our panelists have left, I want to welcome our next panel, which will focus on sustainable agriculture and the urban environment. I'm now excited to be joined by Falani Spivey of Bird's Nest Box, Beverley Wheeler of DC Hunger Solutions, Tariq Sharif from the DC Office of Planning, and Hugo Mogollon of FRESHFARM. Thank you all for joining me today. Before I start, I just have a few more thank yous to some of our donors and partners, including Divine Chocolate, the Spare Food Company, Dr. Bronner Soap Company, Brass Roots Food, Quinn, Stumptown, Coffee Roasters, Numi Tea, Tony's Chocolate Lonely, Ancient Provisions, Gigantic, the Equity Company, and Vina. I would just want to thank them all again for providing so much to all of us today. We have very little time because we're running over a little bit today, and I apologize. So I really just want to dive right in and start with you, Hugo. I'm hoping we can talk about what are some of the greatest barriers to bringing more fresh, locally produced food into cities, particularly those historically marginalized communities that we've been hearing about all day, in Washington. How is FRESHFARM working to engage with local farmers so that we can get more of that food into DC?
Sure, thank you. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, so I think for FRESHFARM, what we see ourselves doing is finding how the city fits in the regional food system. We believe that it's important that cities in general, and specifically DC, reduce its dependency from the industrial food supply chain. And seeing that as a Gulf organization is how we try to shape the work. So for that, just Chris mentioned earlier, what are the barriers to have a central food hub in a place like
Sure.
DC. And we are been exploring ways to decentralize food distribution in an urban setting, and how we can make it hyper-local, how we can make it low infrastructure. And we've seen our farmers markets as a natural points of food aggregation, with farmers from the region come into the city willingly. Some of them come several times a week, some of them come several times in one day, and use that
Sure.
trip to bring food into the city to distribute to institutions and individuals that have been historically excluded from the local food system. So we focus mainly on these institutions that serve children, so childcare centers, institutions that work with seniors, and also institutions that work with individuals that have health issues, like clinics and others. And what we've seen is that when these institutions start incorporating local food in their programs, there's this immediate change in their outcomes, and they are able to tell about them to their funders, and make them excited about that, which is helping creating this virtuous circle where you can include more people and leverage that food into better outcomes. So that's how we see that also institutions are able to grow and make their programs better once they incorporate that. For us, it's very important because we leverage that connection that the institutions already have in the community. We are not the ones that need to make those connections, and we meet people where they are. And that is a very important outcome for us. So last year, we work with more, it's close to 70 institutions that reach more than 7,000 people. So
amazing.
Working that, it's impossible for us to do that by ourselves, but bringing that food, and we're able to create capacity. We use the team that have years of experience working with education, and our footprints team to bring technical capacity to the institutions, and in a way support them.
Well, and those partnerships are so important, those collaborations. And so, Beverley, I'm wondering, from you and Hugo both, and anyone else who wants to dive in here, what policy interventions have enabled more communities through partnerships to access farmers markets?
So at DC Hunger Solutions, we believe in the highest and best use of all federal nutrition programs. We believe if people do not have to worry about where they get their next meal, then they can use their limited resources in order to get housing, more education, get health care.
Mm-hmm.
It is only by having the collaborations that we have with the wonderful people you saw earlier on the stage, and these groups of people that we get to do that work. And we get to use their millions of federal dollars.
Sure.
We should not only use it for feeding people, but in order to support the programs that we have been talking about. And through collaboration, we get to talk about those kinds of things. We get to put policies into place. We talked about Nourish DC, that's helping in the communities, and community is critical, and educating the community is critical. But I also want you to be able to talk to Falani and Tariq, so I'm going to stop because I
Thank you. No, and that point about educating the community is critical. And Falani and Beverley, please chime in on this as well. You know, Sam Cass, and we've all been talking about that. You know, it's really important to produce culturally appropriate foods. That is key for communities. Foods that they feel comfortable eating, that speak to them as families, as individuals, that speak to their souls. Can you talk about the work that you're both doing to support that access to and awareness of these foods, and why that's so important for creating healthy and sustainable communities, having those culturally appropriate foods that people feel comfortable eating?
Sure. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me to be a part of this panel. And I do a workshop, a Garden to Fork workshop, where I focus on making dishes using ingredients that were farmed in culturally appropriate things like African American recipes, something like succotash, where you have okra, corn, and tomatoes. Some people use peas, tomatoes, and corn. And different dishes. And the whole thing about this is the new generation of folks have kind of gotten away from grandma's recipes and things like that. So sometimes we see produce and fresh foods, but we may not know how to prepare them or what they are. So with growing, I seek to empower and educate folks on how they can make these dishes and use these fresh ingredients, and just provide like a nostalgic feeling to eating these things, as if you were visiting your grandma down south, and you know, waking up to those smells, because we did homesteading, and we would go pick field peas, and they'll be ready, the supper will be ready by lunchtime, you know. So we have to go back to the storytelling of these dishes, and just encourage folks beyond eating healthy to know that they can make great, delicious dishes and culinary cuisine, you know, using these fresh ingredients.
Sure, and it is so important to have that storytelling component to make people feel part of their own history and part of their future as well. And we've talked already a lot about, you know, the education and awareness that is needed to help improve the health and sustainability of urban agroecology and urban food systems. And Tariq, you know, I want to turn to you now, because we also need policy to come in and support community members who want to grow their own fruits and vegetables. And I'm wondering if you can talk about how changes to some laws can help those interested in, who are, you know, not only interested in growing, but also interested in having more value added products.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And we've talked about that a lot throughout this entire afternoon. I think a lot of my talking points are already taken by a lot of other folks, other Food Policy Council members, and this group included. But a lot of it goes back to, you know, creating that market for these products, right? I think in DC, we have very limited space, and I'm sure some folks might argue with me, but under the current way we produce food, I don't see a way in which we can produce enough urban agriculture in DC to feed everyone in the city, right? So we have to think locally first, obviously, and then regionally as well. So how those hubs in the areas in places like Virginia with 4P Foods, obviously FRESHFARM with Hugo, and places in Philadelphia like Common Market. So all these groups of these local regional purveyors that are aggregating their product and bringing it to DC, how do we create systems where we can have that support already exist in DC? So Hugo mentioned the Central Food Processing Facility, which is a report that we put out last year that I played a big role in getting across the finish line, which was amazing. You can check out our website, dcfoodpolicy.org, to read the whole thing. It's about 60 pages, so some nice light reading to enjoy. But it's one of those systems where we're bringing in these foods that are local and regional, and creating a market for it here. So there's a place to aggregate those products for small farmers. So instead of having one farm try to fill the needs of a hospital center, we can aggregate those from multiple local farms. They get this one-stop in this facility, and they can sell their products. We create value and dollars coming into the local economy. It creates jobs. It creates wealth-building opportunities, and it helps grow that process, which is really important.
Absolutely.
And so that's one of the things, like, big systems things that we're looking at, but then also policies like Beverley mentioned, Nourish DC. So creating a fund where there's $500,000 annually, and then some, that are available for small businesses that are creating those culturally appropriate, locally driven food systems that focus on wards 7 and 8, where our underserved and marginalized communities exist. So using those opportunities to create wealth building through food businesses that are meeting the needs of the community itself is really important. So those policies that we're trying to institute on the systems level are critical to supporting the need for the city.
And I would
Absolutely.
also say that we really need to educate people about the opportunities that we have. We'd help develop these programs, but then the individuals in the communities that can best take advantage of these don't know anything about it. So the money goes out and nothing comes back into the community. So we really have an opportunity to educate people about how we grow the food and cook the food that we have. We educate people about how they can actually buy foods and use their federal dollars in the community, but we also have to use those funds for job development, for everything that we do to grow our communities. I like to say this, and people hate it when I say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. In DC, we are the last colony or the last plantation, depending on your orientation. And we need to change some of that, and we need to think about how we can help each other do that.
Thank you, Beverley. That was amazing. I want to go back to Hugo. And the last time we spoke, you said that addressing food access is good business for farmers. But dig into that a little bit more for me and explain what that means.
Yeah, and probably is what Tariq was mentioning, right? Is we believe in a more decentralized food system, and urban farms is part of the decentralization, how we grow food, and distribution is the other. And for us, like the role that these institutions play to bring revenue to the farmers, or the local government, right? The local government decides to include local agriculture in their programming and purchase more. That would mean an immense benefit also for the regional farmers. Like that's what we're saying, that the city needs to see what is the influence that they could have in the regional food system and how they can change the patterns of grow, because many farmers can respond to that new demand that a local government could create, and that would reshape the region in general. And when we talk about reaching out to institutions with our farmers, that's who we approach that situation, right? It's like we are going to open this new market for you from these institutions that are eager to get local food, but for A or B reasons, it has been hard for them to do it. We will act as that intermediary, and we are not just like getting a hospital that's already buying food into the local food system. We're including absolutely new clients that were not getting food before. So that is like a new stream of revenue for these farmers. We're increasing the demand, changing agriculture in the region as new farmers take more risks, because they see that they're able to sell that food that they are growing and it won't go into waste, right? We try to use the food before it goes into waste. And thinking about that is important, how cities, how urban settings can affect the rural areas getting new agricultural products in the programs.
Absolutely. Such important points. And Falani, I'm wondering, as a farmer yourself, how do we get more farmers interested in diversifying their crops so that they can do some of the things that Hugo's been talking about?
Sure. I'm going to answer that, but I wanted to chime in on what Beverley
Of course.
said about the access and then stuff being out there and then folks don't know about it. I think we have to make things more relatable. A lot of stuff has been whitewashed, organic foods and even the term sustainability. Even going to Whole Foods, you know, that's looked at as somebody who has money or funds. So we have to be more relatable and meet people where they are. Like I've done garden workshops where young people come and they're like, I really only came because of you. You have great storytelling. I know that it's gonna be relatable even when I go into the schools and do workshops. I'm quite sure that these students wouldn't be that into the gardening if it was a white teacher. But because I'm relatable, and I look like them, I talk like them, then they can relate and see themselves in urban agriculture. So that's what I wanted to say. And Danny, tell me your question again.
I loved that answer much better, Falani. I mean, I think your point about students, to get them interested in agriculture, they need to see people who look like them. And what we have had as a system is not, you've had. I mean, I spent many years in DC and, and working at the DuPont City Farmers Market. And for a long time, it was all white farmers and white folks who shopped there. We need to diversify, and we need to make sure that kids especially are seeing people in the agriculture world, whether it's in policy or farming or education, who look like them so that they want to get interested in it. And I think that is a key point to all this. Hugo, you look like you want to say something.
Yes, I want to invite you to visit DuPont Circle now. And
I know, it's been a long time.
Right?
It's been a long time, but many years ago, when I worked there as a volunteer. Tariq, I want to go back to how, we have a few seconds left. How can policy change some of these things? How can we have better food policies that can make sure that there are more people who look like Falani and Beverley and Hugo in our food system? How can we encourage that? Because a lot of it is going to take education. It's going to take, removing some of the incentives that have already been in place that help white farmers succeed and keep black and brown farmers down.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, and that's something we really try and tackle at the Food Policy Council and DC government in general. So we've centered racial equity as part of our food policy work as a whole. And I believe Tambra or Chris or one of our other Food Policy Council members who was up on one of the other panels really talked about the focus on food apartheid, naming the terms and the institutions and the processes that we have in place that we need to dismantle and break down, right? So and one of those examples is is WIC, right? So the recent bill a couple years ago to remove the restrictions on who could be a WIC vendor in the area. So that helped dismantle a problem within the system. And now we've gone in to support the creation of moving WIC into the EBT system. So it's debit. So you can use your dollars as you need, whatever stores are there, and including small format stores like corner stores that the Central Kitchen operates through the Healthy Corners program. Absolutely. So making those things accessible, so dismantling the system and then creating supports to then build that system back up in the right way is what we're trying to focus on. And that goes across all of our agencies and systems with the Department of Urban Agriculture, DOEE, working with Department of Transportation, looking at affordable housing, and creating urban agriculture around affordable housing units, having access and creating dollars for the Food Access Fund, which is upwards of $20 million for DC, that we're investing in local businesses that are, again, focused on areas that have been marginalized in the community to increase that access. And one of the other things we do to increase people within our policy space and within our Food Policy Council is making sure that when we're asking people to speak at our meetings and to talk about issues, we offer them a stipend. We pay them for their time.
Absolutely, as we all should be.
For us. And then, of course, when we have internships and people helping, we're making sure they're getting value from that too. We are going to either pay them or make sure they're getting school credit, and something is happening for them to benefit them, and we're not just taking that value from them without getting something back.
And
Absolutely.
probably that
Thank you. I have
the-
to cut you off. I'm so sorry. We're over time. I've broken my own rule and gone over time. But I want to go back to what Tariq said about dismantling the system and building it back up better. Thank you to all of the panelists. Let's give them a round of applause, please.